fashion. Rather, it's a tool for the city to specifically encourage certain types of development, certain levels of value, certain amenities. So in other words, you are able to use it as a tool to get the type of project you feel is most beneficial in terms of meeting the objectives of the city and the highest and best land use. There are 5 types of tax increment districts. TID number 9 happens to be a blighted area district. The first 2, mixed use and industrial, you'll notice they have a shorter 20-year life. These are the types of districts we typically see used when we're talking about greenfield or open land development, whereas the blighted area, the conservation or rehabilitation, and environmental remediation tend to be more redevelopment oriented. You do get 7 extra years, recognizing that that type of development is typically more costly than developing open land. And in terms of what you can pay for using dollars collected within a tax increment district, the list is broad. I mentioned at the onset, development incentives, land acquisition, as well as public works. But you're also able to pay for all the various costs associated with implementing the district's plan. That would include costs related to financing. If we have to borrow, we can pay the interest expense, organizational costs, relocation costs, things of those nature. So getting specifically into TID number 9, so this district was created in 2017 as a result of the Sugar Creek Commons project. Again, the district is a blighted area. It was intended to promote redevelopment of the area where Sugar Creek Commons has been proposed. That project obviously has taken some time to get off the ground, and as such, the city has not spent significant dollars in this area. So in other words, the last 3 to 4 years, the district's kind of been there. We've not spent much money, about $42,000 as of the end of last year. But now we have an opportunity to expand the district as a result of the RFP the city did for the Sugar Creek school site, which would involve 2 multifamily projects, 1 market rate, 1 workforce housing. So the intent of this amendment is twofold. One would be to bring in the physical area where those projects would be located. And then secondly would be to amend the list of costs that were in the original plan in order to add those costs that will be necessary for this expanded district. So in terms of the geography, the lighter color, this represents the original district, again, a blighted area. The territory to be added, which is about 14 acres, includes the former school site, also includes several additional parcels along West Verona Avenue and on the corner of Verona Avenue, parcel N here. So as the staff looked at the area, it was determined that while we've got the Catalyst project occurring here, there's a likelihood that other parcels within this district boundary may experience opportunities for redevelopment, so those are being brought in at this time as well. You can amend the boundaries of a tax increment district up to 4 times during its life, so this would be the first of 4 permitted territory amendments. This is a table from the project plan. And so again, the first purpose was to add the territory we showed on the map. The second is to amend this list of project costs. So the original plan called for approximately $9.2 million in expenditures. Again, very little has been spent to date, but the original plan had infrastructure as well as development incentives for Sugar Creek Commons, as well as the classic Old National site to the northeast. The amended plan leaves the infrastructure, which has not yet been undertaken, basically the same. We've added a bit of contingency to recognize that time has passed since the original plan was put together. Another thing we would be adding in this plan is the opportunity for the city, to the extent that funds are available, to spend some of those dollars to contribute towards the improvement of Verona Avenue and the Main Street intersection. Obviously, the development in this area will contribute to the usage of that intersection. It's appropriate to allocate a reasonable share of the cost of that project to this particular tax increment district. So this 496,000 is really a placeholder. That amount could vary ultimately depending on an apportionment of benefit. The Sugar Creek Commons incentive has actually been reduced from the original plan to reflect the approved development agreement for that project. We increased the potential incentive for the classical national site, although I will point out that there has been no agreement to provide an incentive, so this is simply a placeholder so that there's latitude for the city in the plan to the extent that it's necessary to provide incentives on that site. And then the main additional expenditure would be adding the development incentive for the former school site to help pay for not only some aspects of the private construction costs for the two multifamily projects, but also notably all of the public infrastructure through that site, which will be financed and paid for by the developer and then reimbursed to them by the city on a pay-as-you-go basis over the life of the district. So all told, we'd be increasing costs by roughly $8.45 million. In terms of what's expected in the district, we've got, again, Sugar Creek Commons. We're showing the forecasted values for buildings A, B, and C. The classical national site, again, a potential redevelopment on that corner, and then the more recently agreed to projects, the Steve Brown market rate apartments and the Alexander affordable apartments. And what I would again note is that all of these incentives are being offered on a pay-as-you-go basis, which means that the city will not borrow funds up front to provide to the developer. Rather, they will be provided access to the tax increments that they actually generate over time to be used on a reimbursement basis. So this allows the city to minimize its exposure, and ultimately it's a pay-for-performance type of a situation. Lastly, we have the cash flow, and so based on the assumptions as to timing and values of the development, these would be the revenues expected to be realized over time, about $23 million through the year 2045, if the district were to remain open that long. The only city borrowing would be for intersection improvements within the district itself, and we show that potentially happening in 2022. These are the various projected streams of incentive payments for the projects as noted. And then again, we've got as a placeholder roughly $500,000 that the cash flow could ultimately support as a contribution towards the total cost of the Verona and Main Street intersection improvements. Based on this particular set of assumptions, what this indicates is that the district would have enough funds accumulated in its balance by the year 2040 that it would be able to close and repay remaining debt and obligations. So this, again, is the important part of the project plan you were provided, in that we have to demonstrate that the plan is economically feasible. And again, a very large part of that economic feasibility is simply that other than the borrowed monies here, all of these dollars are only paid out to the extent the projects happen and the actual value is created. So that concludes the remarks that I have for you, but happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for that explanation. Questions or comments for Mr. Taves? Seeing no hand, we can move to general discussion and potential motions on this topic. Any questions, comments, or motions on this topic? Commissioner Hingo, and then Commissioner Takawan.
I'm sorry, I'm just, this is a lot to take in. Just wondering, can you explain, you probably already explained it, but there was a lot of stuff coming at me. 420 Church Street site, $8.8 million. Can you tell me what explain what that's about again?
You're referring to the development incentive?
Yes.
Right. So when the developers approached the city through the RFP, what we required them to do was basically provide us with a pro forma that showed their sources and uses to construct the two projects, what their assumptions were as to the cost to operate these projects over a period of time, and what their rate of return on their investment, equity investment into these projects would be, both with and without TIF. And then we reconstruct that in our own model, we vet that, and basically what the $8+ million, how that was arrived at, is it is the amount of money that we have determined is fair and reasonable to pay them from, again, their own tax payments made to the city that would allow them to earn a reasonable market rate of return on this investment. And this goes back to that but-for test I mentioned. In other words, but for the provision of this incentive, in our opinion, the developers would not move forward with these particular projects. So it's a payment to the developer to pay for a combination of private on-site costs, as well as, again, to reimburse them for the public infrastructure through the site, which they will initially be required to finance.
And if I may, Mr. Sayer can help me out on this one too, but like, what all that means is that the city's going to get affordable housing built, a very nice public park, and a road built. So it's kind of like a public interest thing. It's not just so the developers can make money. It's so we can get things that we want. Otherwise, there's no point in TIF, at least in my opinion.
So we give them money up front and then we earn back the money over time? No.
They give us the money up front, and then they get paid back from the tax increment over time. Because you can set up the TIF one of two ways. Either we borrow the money or the developer borrows the money. And my theory is they're the ones who stand to make the profit, so they can take the risks. Cities, they make money, good for them, but I don't see why the city should take a risk on their behalf. My opinion.
Okay.
Commissioner Tucker-Long.
So looking at the money for the classic and old national site, I'm wondering what that would be used for, because there's already a development there. Was the TIF part of the initial discussions we had with them? Because I don't remember that.
Mr. Say?
So that was the redevelopment of that with North Point Development. And as part of that, they were awarded some Dane County housing money, because that's another affordable project. Before that was awarded, they had indicated that they were potentially looking at a potential TIF incentive for that. So that's why those dollars have been kind of plugged in there, as Todd kind of said, as a worst case kind of scenario of just, our understanding of the project kind of before that Dane County money was awarded to them. They've also applied for tax credits as well through the state, and so has the developers on the Sugar Creek school property as well too. So what that dollars and that kind of what Todd has identified there, it's basically a placeholder. It doesn't, what's in there isn't saying the city's actually going to do that. As Todd said, there is no development agreement in place. If the city decides to give that developer that project TIF dollars, that would take a separate agreement and separate negotiations. But all this is doing is trying to identify kind of where dollars may be spent as part of that plan. That's why it's called a project plan. We do have flexibility within that plan, though, to deviate to extent so long as it's consistent generally with the plan.
Mr. Tucker-Long?
Sorry, just kind of a follow-up to that. So if we did want to move forward with a TIF plan in the future, what would that process be? Would it be us as a plan commission? Would it just be the council? Would it just be city staff? Like, what does that kind of process look like going forward?
Yeah, so typically if you're looking at creating a new TIF district, staff is the first one who kind of fields the call. Typically the ideas, and I have multiple conversations. We have multiple meetings with the developer. Ultimately, that is kind of, partially decided by the council. This does take also what's called joint review board approval. Those are the taxing jurisdictions. That includes the school district, the city, Dane County, and then also Madison College. In essence, what those taxing jurisdictions are doing by agreeing to a TIF district is basically stating they're not going to get the tax increment that's being generated there for the life of that TIF district. So they're signing off on not receiving any additional monies out of that area. those, like I said, those conversations initially start with staff. The reason it goes to the Plan Commission, I believe, and Todd can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that's required by state statute as kind of part of the process to set up and create a TID. And ultimately, this goes to the Common Council for this amendment. And this also goes back to the Joint Review Board as well for the kind of the final approval. So there's multiple steps in this project process set up by the statute just because it's pretty significant to create a TIF. I mean, in essence, you know, you're kind of locking up those new taxes being generated for potentially, you know, 23, 27 years. I mean, it's not so much in Verona, but elsewhere, it can be contentious. I mean, that's the reality of it. And depending on where you are in the state, some of these conversations aren't smooth conversations. They can be kind of painful between the taxing jurisdictions. And, you know, we're fortunate here that relatively we have pretty good relationships with the other taxing entities, and they have a real firm understanding of how TIFs work. And obviously Verona has one of the most successful TIFs ever in the state's history. So there's a strong track record here, but the Planning Commission is just kind of one step in the overall process to get this created.
Other questions, comments, or motions on this topic? Commissioner Tucker-Lund.
Sorry, one more question. Okay, so if we allocate that, was it 8 million or whatever for the classic Old National Site, does that tie that money up for the 20 years or whatever of the TIF? I mean, even if we don't have a general agreement, or the general plan agreement or whatever it is about it, does that tie that money up so it can't be used for other things?
Mr. Sayre or Mr. Taves, whoever.
Remember, the money will only be there to the extent that the project occurs. So it's not that it's money the city already has. And again, if the project can proceed without TIF, the city will still realize the taxes, but they won't have the obligation to make payments back to the developer. And then those funds could be used either to fund other eligible projects in the district, or perhaps to allow it to close even earlier than projected.
Commissioner Powers.
Yeah, thanks. In a hypothetical scenario, if the 420 Church Street, let's say they made $6 million in taxes and they underperformed based on that evaluation, we would only then basically be on the hook for the $6 million, right? So if that's what their tax base was, that's what we end up giving them the credit for?
Correct. If they underperform, ultimately they will not recover the dollars that they've indicated they need to make the project successful.
Gotcha.
Which, yeah, just to throw in, that's why I like the pay-go style of TIF, because then they're the ones taking the risk, and that gives them incentive to actually do what they told us they would do. Other questions or comment? Oh, Commissioner Tucker-Lund.
Sorry, me again. Okay, so with one more question on the TIF district stuff. So the base tax rate that is before the TIF, does that include like the increased density and stuff? So like looking at the classic project, we're trying to get a lot of families in there. So there could be, you know, quite a big increase in what the school district has to handle, but would that increase in taxes there not go to the school district? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, is the base tax rate based on like it being a mostly empty property at the moment, or
Mr. Taves?
does that question make sense?
Yeah. So
Okay.
with regard to the classical national site, that's already in the tax increment district. So the taxes that are being received by the jurisdictions are based on the value that whatever the assessor valued the property at as of January 1st of 2017. So anything that has changed in terms of the value since that date is part of the tax increment calculation. Now, for the territory being proposed to be added, the vast majority of that has zero value because it was owned by the school district, transferred to the city. So there will be no taxes paid to the jurisdictions, nor are there any taxes lost because none were being paid previously. Everything that happens will be picked up as increment. Now there's a handful of other parcels that, smaller parcels that are in this amendment area. And again, whatever value is there as of the first of this year is what the jurisdictions will get taxes on based on that value.
Questions, comments, or motions on this topic? Commissioner Takalan.
So I guess I'm a little bit concerned about this then because, I mean, we're talking about adding a lot of density in this area. And if we're getting no base taxes on the Church Street area and not much base tax on the Classic area, but we're adding a lot of families in both of those places, hopefully, what happens with like funding the school district and things like that then? I mean, do we have to come up with that money separately then?
Yeah, let me address the school district last because that's a little bit different situation. But for the city and the county, essentially what you're doing is you're absorbing whatever cost to serve that area is with the rest of your tax base while the district is open. But remember, again, the premise is you're not really losing any taxes because if you don't, if you don't make the TIF investment in the first place, the project doesn't happen. So that's the trade-off. For a period of time, you're absorbing that cost for the long-term benefit of having the increased tax base. With regard to the school district, it's a little bit different story. Wisconsin schools operate under revenue limits. So a school district will get the same amount of revenue regardless. It's just a question of whether it comes from the taxes or through the aid programs. So what happens is when property is in a TIF, what happens with school aids is as value grows, aids go down and more of the school's revenue comes from the taxes instead of aids. While the TIF is open, that value does not factor into the funding formula. So in other words, the district is basically held harmless from the growth that happens in the TIF. When the TIF closes, the district will take a decrease in aids, but at the same point in time, that tax base will then become available to generate revenue, and it offsets almost to the dollar. So school districts are really held harmless from TIF. City and the county, you are going to absorb that cost while the district is open.
Thank you for that explanation. There's a lot to TIF. I feel like it's a pretty complicated instrument. I don't think it works like a lot of other incentive programs. So I think, yeah, it took me a while to kind of get the hang of it. Other questions, comments, or motions on this topic? I'll call on myself then. For the sake of discussion, I will recommend that I will move that the Plan Commission recommends to the Common Council to approve the resolution designating the proposed amended boundaries and approving the project plan amendment to text incremental district number 9, City of Verona, Wisconsin. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Alder Cole. Oh, sorry, Mr. Sayre.
Todd, is this a approval of the resolution by the Planning Commission, or is this a recommendation of the resolution?
The resolution approves the project plan, which is a requirement of the statute. Plan Commission must approve a plan, and it's a recommendation as to the boundaries.
Okay, so is my motion correct then? Yes? Or?
Luke recommended for the resolution. Should he have recommended to approve the resolution, or should he have made the recommendation to approve the resolution or to recommend for the approval of the resolution?
The Plan Commission should approve the resolution. It contains
Gotcha.
all the required statutory elements.
Okay, and I see now I opened it up in my packet. In the resolution recommends to the council. So
Yes.
we're approving a recommendation, which is different than we normally do it. All right, I will reread my motion just real quick. I move that the Plan Commission approves the resolution designating the proposed amended boundaries and approving the project plan amendment for tax incremental district number 9, City of Verona, Wisconsin. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alder Cole. Okay, we are by the book now, so that's good. Motion before the body. Questions or comments on this motion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of approving the resolution designating the proposed amended boundaries and approving the project plan amendment for tax incremental district number 9, City of Verona, Wisconsin, say aye.
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 Opposed, no. And that motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Taves.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks.
We will move on to item 9, which is the site plan review for an additional apartment unit located at 204 West Verona Avenue. Ms. Holt.
So the property is located at 204 West Verona Avenue in the Central Commercial Zoning District in the Downtown Design, Use, and Overlay Zone. The property currently contains American Family Insurance Company and 2 apartment units. This is a site plan review, which means that the Plan Commission makes the final decision. The applicant is proposing an additional apartment unit that will contain 3 bedrooms added to the northern portion of the building or parking requirements. However, the applicant is proposing a 2-car garage for this apartment unit with access from North Marietta Street. A sidewalk will be added for the entire property along North Marietta Street. Although a tree will be removed, the applicant is proposing to replace the tree and add 2 crimson king purple maple trees along North Marietta. Staff is supportive of the additional landscaping for the property. The applicant will continue to meet all of the setback and height requirements, as the addition will completely match the roof line and design of the existing building. Staff has informed the applicant that this would be the last potential unit that could be added to the existing building in this design, which means that there's no more room on the site unless you demolish the whole building and start over. The applicant will overhaul the exterior of the existing building to blend with the proposed addition by residing the entire building with smartboard and using a very navy blue color with white trim as seen in the photo. Staff is receptive to a 3-bedroom addition to the existing building, as there are not a lot of 3 bedrooms proposed in the downtown overlay district. Staff recommends the Plan Commission approve the site plan to allow for the construction of a 3-bedroom 1,357 square foot addition to the existing building located at 204 West Verona Avenue. And I'm here to answer any questions, and I think the applicant might also be there. Oh, yes, he is.
I have a quick question on the maple tree specified. Is that a Norway maple?
No.
Okay, do you know what kind of maple it is? Because I did a quick Google search, which doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate, but I'm just wondering if you know if it's a red maple or a silver maple or something else.
He said Crimson King Purple Maple. So my assumption it would be a purple maple or a red maple.
Sorry, I'll look it up while the discussion continues. But Norway maples are not, it's not an invasive in the sense of buckthorn, but it's not a native, and they're not good for wildlife.
I have one in my backyard.
I have one in my front yard. It's just they're expensive to take down, but depending on how it goes. Any other questions or comments on this one or motions? Commissioner Tucker-Long.
When I make a motion, can I add like a suggestion about the landscaping, Luke, with your concern about the maple tree? Is that something we can add?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I would like to make a motion that we approved the site plan to allow for the construction of a 3-bedroom, 1,357 square foot addition to the existing building at 204 West Verona Avenue, with the condition that they use native plantings for the proposed trees.
Mr. Sayre, is that motion all right?
It
Is
is.
that okay?
Yeah, and I think you're right, Mary Diaz. I think that is a type of Norway maple. That's what I'm kind of seeing online here in my quick Google search. But we can, that condition's fine. We can work that out with the applicant. Yep.
Okay.
Excellent. I will second. Motion before the body. Questions or comments on the motion? Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of approving the site plan for the additional apartment unit located at 204 West Verona Avenue with the conditions specified, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. And that motion passes. Next, we'll move on to item 10, which is a discussion and possible action regarding an initial plan development concept review for 700 apartment units and 2 commercial buildings with approximately 9,800 square feet per building located at 2920 County Highway M. Ms. Holt?
So the property is shown in yellow east of County Highway M and south of County Highway PD. Currently, the property is located in the town of Verona and abuts an existing town neighborhood. Whispering Coves is located across County Highway M, and the Godshaw property is located to the east of the property. Ms. Godshaw has informed staff that she intends to place the property in conservation, which is the one to the east. The property is located in the 2015 North Neighborhood Plan and is shown in red. The neighborhood plan proposed the church property remain as a church, a portion of the property as suburban residential, and the Wharton property next to the substation as wooded open space. There are several experts from the neighborhood plan and the staff report, which confirms that commercial is proposed along County Highway M. A signal will need to be installed south of the church property, which is shown now on Stony Ridge Circle, and access to County PD would be a right in and right out only if access is granted. The proposal meets all of these ideas. The plan proposed single-family residential development south of the church, although multi-family residential was not proposed as part of the plan for this property. There were requirements in the neighborhood plan for multi-family buildings that would be 3 stories tall with community amenities for young professionals. The plan treated the development as 2 separate properties, never envisioning them as one potential development. This is an initial plan that the applicant is proposing for buy-in from the Plan Commission and the Common Council, as it is a very, very long process. As listed in the staff report, the property would need to be annexed into the city, which is possible. The Wharton property is located outside of the urban service area and would have to gain approval to amend the boundary by the Capital Area Regional Plan Commission, or CARPC. Based on the initial proposal, the applicant would go through the plan unit development approval process due to exemptions wanted, and finally a land division would also need to occur. The property is located in the city's future growth area and the city and town boundary agreement, and those are also shown on the slide here. So the applicant is proposing a maximum of 700 apartment units over 6 buildings throughout the site, which is approximately 30 to 32 units per acre. There are 2 9,800 square foot commercial buildings fronting onto County Highway M. This project will be phased in over a number of years. It would take 5 to 10 years to complete the project. It is important to note that a lot of the development would need to occur at once as an approval because the land size, the stormwater coordination, and other infrastructure would all be needed to be done at similar timing. Vehicular access to the site will come from the required signal at County Highway M and Stony Ridge Circle, and a right in, right out on County Highway PD. There is an existing bus stop pull-off area located on County Highway M in front of this development. There are existing bicycle lanes on County Highway M and County Highway PD, as well as a bicycle path on the opposite sides of those roads. However, there are ample opportunities to access the property without using a vehicle. Internal to the site will be private roads connecting the proposed apartment buildings, commercial buildings, and the church to the right-in, right-out access point. Recreational paths meandering through the site will connect the proposed buildings and wander by the stormwater management ponds. Although the neighborhood plan proposed a regional stormwater basin, the regional basin did not come to fruition. The amount of stormwater ponds proposed for this property are all needed to support any development for this property. Staff recommends a connection from the recreational path to the existing bus station pull-off area and connecting the commercial area to the traffic signal. While sustainable design is not required in the ordinance at this time, the applicant is proactively proposing several sustainable design features as part of the project dependent on the total number of apartment units. These features could include green roofs, rain gardens, LED lighting, and charging stations. And the next slide will show some examples of the types of buildings that could be designed for this site, ranging from a 4-story brick facade building with a step-down end cap and pitched roof to a modern flat facade that plays with colors and has a flat roof. As it is very early in the process, staff has received one phone call in support of the development and one that is not in support of the development. The existing neighbors to the south of the development have not contacted staff at this time. With that said, staff supports the development on this property, as this property is a very constrained development site due to stormwater for any type of development. Any development on this site would be a gateway to the city once the property is annexed. Although the neighborhood plan did not propose this type of development in this location, staff feels that there are advantages to having direct access to 2 county highways, bicycle paths, and a traffic signal for this type of development. Staff recommends the Plan Commission review the materials and provide pointed feedback to the applicant, answering 3 items or more. Do you support multifamily development? If yes, how many units and how many stories? And I'm available to answer any questions as well as the applicant.
Thank you for that explanation. I'll call on myself real quick. I have a question and a few comments. I know it was zoned one way, but with the way the stormwater stuff has worked out, is single-family homes viable at that site, like economically? If anyone want to take a crack at it.
I think it's going to be challenging. I mean, the challenge here, and Carla can speak in detail about the stormwater on the site. I mean, it's in that closed basin again. So this closed basin requires the back-to-back storage of the 100-year event. So a lot of this site is being consumed by the stormwater. That's why you have so many ponds and so many infiltration areas. Could it be viable? I mean, depends on what how much the lots are and whatnot. But it's going to be difficult. I mean, based upon probably the asking price of the property, then coupled with the fact that there's a lot of stormwater on this site, it's going to be very difficult to get those numbers to work from just a cost standpoint. I mean, never say never, but it's very difficult.
One really big mansion, maybe. Onto my comments. I do want to say the city, I hope, is going to be very respectful to the Godshall property. I understand that, that's not part of this project and it's totally separate, but I just want to say we're being respectful and totally respecting the wishes to preserve the property. That's not, we can put whatever zoning map we want to put, but it's ultimately private property rights and they can do whatever they want with it. And I fully respect and support them in that. I do want to say I'm not, the questions in regard to multifamily, yeah, I would be fine with that. And I'm not sure about the heights and the exact unit cost. It's the devil's in the details on a lot of these projects, and I'd want to see some traffic impact stuff and some other things. But in regards to the overall project, I'm willing to hear more. I think as noted kind of in the staff report, there's already some heavy duty infrastructure out there, which the city of Verona has partially paid for. If you think of where people work in the city, this would provide a straight shot to Epic. Not that necessarily everyone who lives in an apartment will work at Epic, but if you think of people working in Middleton, the west side of Madison, and the possibility of a bus stop, there's a lot of potential like for good traffic patterns there. I also think, this isn't cited as affordable housing, but when it comes down to it, I think market rate housing responds to supply and demand, and if there's more units built, it helps to keep rental prices reasonable. Is it going to be necessarily what we define strictly as affordable? No, but it does mean that it's makes housing available to more people, so that if someone works at Epic, they can find a spot to live in the city. But those are my thoughts for now. Questions or comments from the Plan Commission? Commissioner Tucker-Long.
Yeah, I'm wondering, with all of the stormwater on there, if there's any way to get more parking like underground so we can have less pavement out there. And I'm wondering too, how concerned are we about parking considering there's no off-street parking around there? Or would there be on-street parking? Would there be parking on the streets of their internal streets that aren't really streets? And then also, who's responsible for plowing those? Those would be their streets to plow?
Mr. Sayre?
Well, if they're private, it'd be the responsibility of the developer. Regarding kind of parking on those areas, that's a detail that we just don't have the answer to that right now. They would have underground parking as part of this, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, that would be the intent, to have underground parking in the building. So I think what you're seeing here is, I don't want to say mostly overflow, but mostly kind of some guests and probably picking up what they can't fit underground. So I believe their intention is to get that underground. I think it'd be difficult to go down any further than, typically you only go down one level, not any more than that, just because you get a significant cost if you're going deeper. But I'm sure the developer, this is pretty high level concept. I'm sure they'd be willing to look at reducing that more. I think that'd be their preference. The more they can do it, the quite honestly, the better benefit for them as well. So I know they're motivated to look at what options they can utilize on this property to, I don't want to say green it up, but make it less impervious, just from the standpoint of the more they add, the more of the impact they're having on stormwater.
Commissioner Powers.
Thank you. The number 700 is pretty big. The other project that's just north of there on M, I think Adam, you and Catherine said you looked up last meeting. How many apartment buildings, how many units is that one?
Catherine, remember? I don't remember.
About 300.
300, okay. It seems like there's a lot over there already, and I don't know what 700 apartments looks like, but it feels like it would be a lot. And there's a lot right there in Midtown too, and that's a pretty large complex. So to me, 700 seems like a lot. Again, I don't have a good example of what that looks like in real life, but it feels pretty big considering the other projects we have going on. I was looking at that table. Even though it feels like we've approved a lot of apartments in Verona, I know not all of them are up, but this would basically double that number, which is pretty big already.
Questions, comments from Alder Cole?
I was just going to piggyback off Commissioner Powers. There's that huge new apartment complex going up on M, close to Madison, across, you're almost to Madison, that you talked about last week too. So you said that was what did you mention, like those 300 or 400 apartments there too? Or just seems like, it's just, what I'm talking about?
That's the
Like
same one.
terracing that we talked about last week, you're almost into Madison. It just seems like it's getting really concentrated with apartments and just come up.
Other questions or comments from the Plan Commission? Alder Cole?
Sorry, I had one more thought too about pedestrian connectivity, more, if people want to walk or ride their bikes into town, further into downtown. Is there going to be any kind of bike trails or anything like that that are off kind of like the main road? Because that gets really busy there.
Mr. Sayre?
The bike path on the west side of County Highway M, and that will take you down to close to cross country on that bike path. I think it turns into a sidewalk for a small stretch and then gets you down towards the Sugar Creek Elementary and the middle school, which is mostly paths. So I mean, you can get there pretty easily. This will require a traffic signal at that intersection of Stony Ridge Court. So there'll be an easy crossing there. So that will be the most convenient way. It's a direct way to get people down there. Ultimately, if the Godshall property is required by the county or a conservation type entity, there's the potential for probably walking trails in there. I don't know if that's going to be appropriate from a biking standpoint. That's the future conversations, but the easiest way from a bike and pedestrian standpoint is going to be to actually go to right down there's sidewalks on the east side, and then I think there's sidewalks on the east side, but definitely there's a bike path on the west side that is a easy connection.
Other questions or comments from the Plan Commission? Commissioner Hingle.
What is that in the corner of County Highway PD and County Highway M?
The substation?
That's a substation. Okay. I guess I'm not against having another 700 apartments just because we do have a housing shortage around here in general. And even if they're not workforce development housing, the more housing you have, the more affordable everyone's housing is, I think.
I'll call on myself real quick. In regards to the private roads, I'm not the biggest fan, and this would be potentially way, way, way in the future, but is this something we could specify that the private roads have to stay with the owners of the buildings? Because I know there's been issues where people will sell buildings and they won't sell the private roads. The person who owns the private roads basically leaves the state and we'll never get a hold of them to repair it, and then the city has to deal with the fallout of bad roads.
Yeah, I think there's ways we can potentially address that with the developer on just the ownership structure and how these roads are created. So that is a detail. That's something we can work out as part of a development agreement.
Excellent. Other questions or comments from the Plan Commission? Commissioner Tucker-Long.
With a complex this large, is there any sort of thing like we have with, the big stores like Costco and Festival, where if they don't fill the apartments, they don't just sit empty? No.
Mr. Sayre?
No, we don't have that. I think it kind of goes a little bit to Commissioner Hingle's point of at some point supply and demand kicks in at that point, and then what you'd probably see are the rent rates dropping on those. But no, from a vacant standpoint, and and the occupancies right now in Dane County are so ridiculously high. I mean, that could change at some point, but when the vacancy is only 1 or 2%, it's that at least in the near term future, I don't see that being a problem. Plus, once they go vacant, that's also when you start seeing potential redevelopment of those properties. But it turns into supply and demand at that point, and you'll see rental rates drop if they aren't being filled.
Excuse me. Other questions or comments from the Plan Commission? Mr. Sayre.
If I can just kind of summarize, I guess, it sounds, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like you're open to multifamily on this property. I think there's some concerns from at least a few members on the total number of units. But from a strictly use standpoint, it sounds like people are open to considering multifamily on this, and with obviously a few people skeptical of 700 units on there. Catherine, did you have a third question regarding building height? Was that on there as well? Is there a preference on, as you look at this, building heights? Are you comfortable with 4-story? Would you like 3-story? Are you willing to look at a split where you might have some taller buildings towards PD, maybe some smaller buildings like 3-story buildings on the south side? Any thoughts on that?
I'll go quick and then call on Commissioner Tucker along after that. I mean, I think I would potentially be open to the building heights proposed. I would say if there's going to be taller buildings, they should go towards PD, just to kind of minimize the impact on the neighborhood south of there. But that's my thoughts. Commissioner Tucker Long.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty non-residential area currently, if I'm remembering correctly. You know, but is there a huge neighborhood going across the street from these? Across M is where that. Okay, was it Whispering Pines? I'm trying to remember which.
Whispering Coves.
Whispering Coves. Sorry, Whispering Coves. Okay. So I guess I kind of wouldn't want to see them all be like super gigantically tall, towering things, but you know, like a mixed variety of heights, I would be okay to seeing a plan for, I guess. I do really like that they have a lot of amenities like a community garden and a dog park built in here, just because there's not an easy way to get to a lot of other stuff nearby. One thing that might be interesting to discuss is, if I'm remembering correctly, Whispering Coves is the one that was going to have the nature preserve area right on along M. And so it might be nice to find some way to either go over or under M from this big development to the nature area right across the street. And that might be a way to connect them more up with the bike path that would be going through there as well. So I don't know how that would work, but I just wanted to toss that out there.
Excellent. One quick question for Mr. Sayers. Where is the Whispering Coves project? I understand they ran into some difficulties.
Where is it located, or where in the process?
Sorry, I guess where are they in their process? Physically, they're across the street, basically, in south.
Sure. So we're still working with them on a variety of agreements out there. You know, I think we're getting closer on some of those agreements, but they are still kind of in the queue, in the process of kind of working towards finalizing their plans, and then also the development agreements with that project. So I don't, you know, have a firm timeline. You know, potentially those agreements could go at the next council meeting. Potentially those agreements could go a month or two from now. So I mean, it's one of those we're waiting. There's multiple parties in a few of those agreements as well, so it's a little more complicated. So it's still in the works, but I don't have a firm timeline on that project.
Thanks. Other feedback from the Plan Commission on building heights? Seeing no hands, does staff feel like they have received sufficient feedback?
I'm fine. Catherine, you good?
I think it gives the developer direction on whether he should come back or not, and I think that's the important part.
Excellent. All right. With that, I'm going to propose a 5-minute recess before we move to item 11, because I have to use the restroom. So, be back in 5 minutes.
Turn off your
12. But anyways, we will move on to item 11, which is a discussion and possible action regarding a subdivision regulation text amendment to amend section 14-1-70U9 related to changing existing street names. Mr. Sayer.
Thank you. So this is a text amendment that will, if the planning commission forwards it to the council, will go to the council next Monday night with a public hearing at the common council meeting. In essence, what this is doing is changing our process to make changing street names easier than what it is today. Currently, if there is a street name that needs to be changed, it has to go through what's called an affidavit of correction process. That's where, in essence, the surveyor is signing off on the change as a mistake or correction. Surveyors don't like doing that because they feel like it's admitting they made an error on the plat or the CSM, and which they didn't. It's just the fact that we want to change the name of the street. So by making this ordinance change, what it does is it gives the common council discretion to change street names if they choose to do so. It explicitly will state that in the ordinance. So that's in essence what we're doing here. This is potentially a recommendation tonight to the common council. If you decide to recommend, staff is recommending at the planning commission recommend the common council amending section 14-1-70 parens U parens 9 of the subdivision regulations, changing existing street names. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that explanation. Questions, comments, or motions on this item? Commissioner Tucker Long.
Adam, could you give us a super quick explanation of what we're changing the process to?
Sure. So there most likely would be so if somebody wanted to change a street name, so say, we'll just hypothetically say Verona Avenue, because we won't do that, but let's just say that. If somebody wanted to change the street name of Verona Avenue, the process which we haven't laid out, I would imagine would probably go through public safety. Public safety is the one who typically gets involved in street names, and the planning commission and council don't see that, but that's where the police and fire weigh in on street names to make sure that we're not naming a street after another prairie or naming a street after another hometown type streets. Those are the common names that have been overused and sometimes create issues in the city. So talking out loud right now, because I didn't give it any thought, I would say it probably would go through the public safety committee, because that makes a sense to kind of send it through there more as a kind of public safety holistic street standpoint. It would probably come out of that committee as a recommendation to change the street names, and then it would be a simple resolution or ordinance adoption by the common council. So yeah, that's what we're doing versus the affidavit of correction. When a surveyor submits that basically goes through the CSM process. So that correction instrument goes to the planning commission and then ultimately goes to the common council for approval. So this would kind of change it out of the planning commission's hands to the public safety committee, but I don't envision this happening too often. I think there's probably a couple that might be out there right now, but it's not an exhaustive list. We try to avoid that. It upsets people when you change their street names when they have their mail going there and everything else. It's not a simple process, so it's not a process that we take lightly, because anyone living on those streets, it's tough. It's tough for them.
Other questions or comments or motions? Commissioner Dr. Long.
Then I move that we recommend to the council that they approve amending section 14-1-70 (U) (9) of the subdivision regulations related to changing existing street names.
Motion by Commissioner Tucker Long. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner Powers, I think. Motion before the body. Questions, comments on the motion? Seeing no further discussion. All those in favor of recommending to the Common Council to approve subdivision regulation text amendment to amend section 14-1-70 paren U paren 9 relating to changing existing street names. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, no? And that motion passes. Next, we'll move up on to item 12, which is a discussion and possible action regarding zoning and sign ordinance rewrite. Ms. Holt.
So per the staff memo in your packet, the Sustainability Task Force met on February 15th and reviewed applicable items in the proposed zoning ordinance that focused on sustainability. So tonight we will discuss the proposed textual modifications to gain agreement to the changes to add it to the proposed ordinance. The first one up is regarding the charging of electric vehicles. The yellow text is the language that the task force has proposed to add to the proposed ordinance. There was also lots of discussion regarding single-family homes. Several suggestions included installing a 220 outlet in the garages, allowing the charging option, or pulling the wire to have an option to install the outlet later. But there was no conclusion from the task force as to whether this was a requirement or a suggestion, or how a single-family portion of the electric charging stations should go into the proposed ordinance. So I'm looking for feedback on this one.
Questions or comments from the Planning Commission on this item? I guess I'll call on myself. I think it would be a good idea potentially to require it. I think when a home is being built, the costs are relatively low to add it, and I think it would help encourage EV adoption. But Commissioner Takala.
Real quick question. When it says 3 parking spaces with conduit and a 4th ready to be converted, does that mean the 4th would not have conduit run to it? Or I guess I'm not sure. Or do they mean like they've got conduit to like the center of 4 parking spaces and 3 of them are ready and one's not? I guess I don't understand what we're asking for here.
Ms. Holt?
So previously it was just shall have a minimum of 3 parking spaces, and then we added the with conduit because before it wasn't going to be wired for a structured parking facility. And then after that it gets kind of fuzzy, you're right, on how it should be translated.
Okay, so yeah, I guess what I'd like to see is, does this mean that, let's see, the structured parking facilities don't actually have to have any charging stations, they just have to have conduit for charging stations, is that correct? Because I think we should have charging stations, I guess. I mean, we're requiring surface parking to have a charging station. And so I don't see why structured parking facilities wouldn't also be required to at least have one. I mean, I'm all for having conduit run for more of them, you know, so that, because it's impossible to run conduit later. So, you know, I'm all for having more conduit run, but I would like to see them at least have to meet the surface parking requirements as far as having an actual charging station. Unless there's some reason we don't want that.
I guess looking at it, I almost feel like that might have been a typo, and that the one additional in the second line from the bottom, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like that was supposed to be designated as that was where the charging station was. 3 with conduit and 1 with a charging station. But I'm not sure because I don't have all my notes.
Yeah, that would make more sense to me too. But
Commissioner Powers.
The way I was reading it was that last additional one was the 1 per 50 spaces. Am I misreading that? So I thought that you get 3 with conduit and then 1 for every additional 50 spaces you add, you'll have 1 additional one that I assume would also have conduit.
I think that's how it's worded now. Ms. Holt?
That's how I've been interpreting it, but also hearing others.
I guess I agree with Commissioner Tucker Long that it would be nice to have the initial ones. I mean, to say that we're requiring at least one. Because otherwise, at what point, I mean, you build the conduit and say, well, we're done, we met the code, or we met the regulation, and I'll never go in and put in the actual charge. Doesn't do me any good if I bought my you know, and they're becoming more mainstream, right? It's not like everyone has to own a Tesla. It's really, you know, it's a Chevy Bolt or whatever they're calling them now. You know, there's more and more every year, and by the time most of these places are up, it'll be a more than 1% of their 2% of your cars will be there.
Mr. Sayre.
I guess what do you guys want? I guess where would you prefer to have it here? Let's cut to the chase, and we can get that in there when we update it. So right now we have one charging station per on the surface, one charging station per every 50 parking spaces. Do you want that same requirement put in place for underground parking facilities, or do you want more than that?
Commissioner Tucker.
Is there any sort of like standard of what's being requested, or you know, in other areas of like Madison or the county, or are there any sort of statistics as far as like how many cars in the average parking garage are electric or something? I don't know. I feel like we're sort of pulling a number out of the air, and I mean, I'm all for having some sort of number, but I'm wondering if we have any data to support our number that we're choosing. And it's okay if we don't. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean,
Mr. Sayre?
Catherine can jump in with any data she has. I mean, generally, I think it's across the board on kind of, it's still pretty new here for most buildings. The key on it is the conduit. That's going to be the big key regardless, because the conduit is where you get the cost in of trying to pull this in after the fact. And if there's no route to pull it in, that's where the incredible cost comes up on that. I'll let kind of Catherine make any comments on what the minimum requirements are. I think their component to structured parking is, how do you want to apply this? Because I think obviously you want to apply it to residential areas, like underground parking at apartments. I think the big outlier that we have that is different than pretty much everybody else you're going to look at is Epic has some very sizable parking garages on their property. And the ultimate question on that is, you know, some of their garages are, the last one we approved was over 2,000 parking stalls in there. The most efficient way to charge this stuff is typically at a home, because I mean it sits overnight. So depending on what you do, you park your car and then typically you're at your house for hopefully at least 8 to 12 hours. I mean, so you can typically get a better charge there. That's the only outlier we're going to have kind of in structured parking as you look at this of, is this applying just to residential type uses, or do you want to make that holistically across the board? And I raise that as more of a, if you start backing into 2,000 spaces, that's a very large number. I'm not disagreeing with the number, but it's one of those, just something to keep in the back of your mind. Catherine, was there any data that as part of this that Hoozle poll as part of this?
So what Jackie Wells informed me was that it kind of, like you said, it ranges depending on where you're located. I previously worked in Maryland, and they redid their ordinance in 2014, which is old in comparison, but pretty cutting edge for electric charging vehicles. And so their requirement was 100 spaces or more must have one parking space ready to be converted, because at that time, they couldn't figure out if there was a universal plug or not. And now that's becoming more prevalent than it was before. But going back to what Adam was saying is that you could almost, instead of having this as a performance standard and have it as a blanket standard for all parking situations, we could almost break it out into smaller groups so that you have the parking requirement for the single family homes, and then you have the parking requirement for multifamily, and then employment that has structured parking, because Alder Ryan at the Sustainability Task Force meeting suggested that if you go to the grocery store and things like that, you're not really charging your car while you're there. You're charging it overnight at your house. And he happens to have one that he charges. He also mentioned that you typically don't go to work and charge it, because you drive there, you park there, but you don't necessarily know if it's safe to charge it typically, or if there's going to be a power surge or anything else. And some of the levels of charging is different. So if you have, I think you said there was 3 different charging levels, which also corresponds to the amount of time it takes to charge the vehicle. So if it's a low, like a level 1, it could take the whole day to charge it, versus a level 3, which could take a couple, like an hour or so. So there's a big difference in that too, versus just whether you provide the actual station to charge it. So I don't know if that helped or hurt.
Commissioner Dr. Long?
So, I mean, I don't want to get into specifying any sort of technology since it's constantly changing, but is there a way that we could specify like a certain amount of standard efficiency or something so that it's not like, okay, we put in the absolute lowest possible amount so that nobody can use it and we don't actually have to provide electricity kind of a thing. But also too, I think some of it is just making sure that we have enough electrical stations, charging stations spread out around town so that if somebody gets stuck, they have a charging station nearby kind of a thing, you know? And while, you know, it might not be standard habit to charge it while you're at the grocery store, if you're running low on your way home from work, you could stop at the grocery store, grab your groceries, and at least get, you know, a little bit to make sure you can make it home in time or something, you know? Or if you get stuck in traffic or something, it gives you a place to pull over, you know?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I agree. I use it at Sugar River. I use it at the grocery store. And when I go down to Madison, I look for where the parking lots are that have it. I feel like it's useful for me. I don't have a fully electric car. Mine is like park electric, so it runs for 30 miles or whatever. But what's nice is if I go to the grocery store or any of those places, I can usually make it the rest of the way without having to use gas. I think it would be nice to break it out, like Catherine said, to be able to say, you know, businesses one level, residential another level. Do we need to make that decision tonight? Is that what we're thinking? To put it into the PowerPoint?
Mr. Sir?
I don't think you need to make it tonight. I think, you know, if right now we have for surface lots, we have 1 space per 50 spaces. And I think that kind of meets the intent of these larger lots. I think you'll get enough spread on those that you can, I want to say blanket most of the city, but you can probably get most of the city covered. I think that it just gets into the structured parking of how many do you want to require for structured parking, and do you want to break that into residential, and then, you know, establishing a minimum initially, and then do you want to establish, which I think the intent of it was to have additional spaces ready to be pulled with conduit. I guess if you have ideas, we take them tonight. It'd be great.
Commissioner Tucker Long, and then myself.
So I'm wondering if instead of needing to separate out surface parking versus structured parking versus residential parking, like, you know, I know our goal is to try to simplify things. Maybe what we could do is say, like, you need, you know, 1 charging station per, you know, 50 spaces, regardless, but then with a minimum of at least 1, so that would count for residential, would need to have 1 or something, or at least like with a minimum of conduit to 1 or something, we could say. So residential houses would at least have to have conduit run, and then, you know, once you start hitting 50 parking spaces, you actually have to have more than 1. And then we could cap it to like a maximum of 100 spaces or something. And then after that, you just need, you know, X number of charging stations per 100 or something. And that would help with like an epic type situation if they're talking about 2,000 spaces, you know. On the flip side, if they have 2,000 cars there, maybe they need 400 charging stations. I don't know. I mean, that's a lot of cars, you know. So, anyways, that was just my thought on how we could maybe word it to sort of encompass all of those in one ordinance without having to have so many different categories. Because then I wonder when we get into like apartment complexes where they're not really commercial, they're not really residential, they're, you know, in the middle, and then we have to have an ordinance for them, and I don't know. Anyways, my 2 cents.
I I do like the idea of simplifying things, just to build on what Commissioner Tucker Long said. So like if basically surface and structured parking were the same, I think I like that. I would like to see a minimum of one charging station installed for every 50 parking spaces or something like that. So any significant parking facility is going to have at least one charging station ready to go. And I think, in line with some of the other comments about people charging at home mainly, is why I think it's important to include the 220 outlet in garages, just because I think that'll be useful and help Verona be ready for the future, basically. But those are my thoughts. Any other thoughts on this one from the Planning Commission? Oh, Commissioner Hingle.
I'm just wondering, is this only on new construction, or is this existing construction? And if it is existing, I'll answer that question first.
New construction.
Just new construction.
Yes.
Or,
Sorry, Captain.
or parking modifications. So if you're adding additional parking spaces, that puts you over the 50 threshold, then you would have to install that.
So like at your house, if you don't do anything at your house, if you just keep living there, myself personally, if I don't do anything to my house, not a problem. If I go in and start ripping out the garage and making changes in there, that might potentially trip that requirement. If someone has a project, as Catherine's point, they start adding parking, if they start adding onto the building, that might potentially trip some requirements as well too. But if no one's doing anything to their property, no, it's status quo.
Commissioner Tucker Long.
In those situations when someone would be adding on to an existing parking lot and it would trip the requirements, could we give them an exemption at that time so they don't have to rip up their existing parking lot or something? Is this something that we can do an exemption for, like we do for the number of parking spaces?
Mr. Sayre?
I think how the new ordinance is written, yes, I think potentially that would qualify for an exemption. I think that the requirements for exemptions in the new ordinance are pretty broad. So if somebody asked for it, they'd have to go through the process, obviously. But if they're adding parking, typically they're going to be ripping up the ground already. So it's depending on where the electrical is, they can usually more easily run a additional line if they had to. It's not super easy, but I mean it's more reasonable versus ripping up existing lot completely.
Sure. I guess was thinking that that gives us a way. If something's going to be especially burdensome to an existing business that's just making some modifications, we'd have a way to give them an exemption of this new requirement.
Other thoughts on this one?
Just
Commissioner Powers.
knowing the size of some of the parking lots in Verona area, are we considered capping the number of electric vehicle spots? Because 1 in 50 would put quite a burden on one particular company.
Mr. Sayre, or I guess that is a possibility. I guess that's what we're here to.
Maybe it's not for me to propose, but I just wondered the amount of spots that they would be put into the city would be more than everyone else combined, probably.
Commissioner
just
Tucker.
maintaining those buildings.
Sorry, Commissioner Tucker.
That's okay. To go with what Commissioner Powers was saying, I think in that case, if they don't want to put that many spaces in, they can always come to us for an exemption. And we could definitely approve an exemption based on that. Because, there's some big stuff looking to come in, and, I'm not sure at what point in the process these zoning requirements will go into place. But, it doesn't seem like it's an overly onerous process to ask for an exemption for a bigger company that's already coming to us with all these other plans multiple times. So I don't know, I guess I'm comfortable with it. What I would like to see though is I want to make sure there's a minimum of one, so that if we have a parking lot with 49 spaces, they still have to have one. So I just want to make sure that's included somehow.
Mr. Sayre.
So to clarify that, so let's say they have 8 parking spaces. You think they should have at least one in that situation? Or we cut this at 50. So if they didn't have, if they had 49 or less, they would not have to put one in. And part of the reason is some of these smaller projects, if it's got, let's say, I'm using 8 spaces or 10 spaces, to have them put one charging station in, that is going to be that's going to be a burden. Because you're talking the cost to run the electric, and then you're talking the actual charging station itself. You're talking, you're over $10,000, $15,000, and for a smaller project like that is going to be a burden on those types of developments. So that's my comment back, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I guess I feel like a parking lot with 49 parking spaces is a pretty big parking lot. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. It just seems like a bigger parking lot. I'm just thinking like the Hometown Junction parking lot doesn't have anywhere near 49 spaces, but I mean, that's the kind of parking lot where I'd really want to see one of these. I don't know. I'm just trying to think how many places would this apply to and how many wouldn't it apply to?
I'll call on myself real quick. I do want to say, of course, if it's a municipal lot, we do have more control over it. And just because we're not required to put one in, we could. I mean, the issue we run into is kind of what Mr. Sayers alluded to, is that ripping up the parking lot is super expensive. But I do think it's, at some point they will need to be ripped up. And I think it's something for the council and potentially other, whoever's looking at the time to potentially add one in then. Other questions or comments on this one?
Does this affect the Costco that we just talked about tonight?
It would not, since it had been approved. Mr. Sayre, though?
Correct. There'd be a bunch of projects that would be grandfathered under the current ordinance.
Okay.
Any thoughts or any other thoughts on the EV stuff? All right. Ms. Holt, I guess landscaping is up next.
Yes. So landscaping. The task force also discussed some of the landscaping topics. The one that they added are the items in yellow, which is just that, ground cover will include native to or adapted to the state of Wisconsin. So it's just supporting other things that we've already articulated in some of the other plantings that we've had, but we're just adding that ground cover to make sure it's the same thing. And I know that we still need to look and make sure that it's native to the state of Wisconsin and not invasive. So hopefully that one's good. Okay.
What about the ground cover on that one, Catherine? Do you want me to take that one?
Sure.
So that just to make everyone aware, the current draft has this ground cover language, where it says a minimum of 75% of the surface area of every parking lot, island, and median should be planted with living ground cover. So if you head out to a lot of newer projects, and even quite honestly, a lot of the city projects, you see a lot of stone that's been placed on these kind of islands. This would require a lot of those areas no longer to be stone, but actually planted with some type of ground cover on it. And that might be the more significant piece to this landscaping section, is that requirement, because a lot of projects, and city projects included, use that stone material because that keeps down a lot of the weeds and junk that kind of grows in. So wasn't sure if anyone had any thoughts on that requirement that's in there, because like I said, that might be a silent one that is going to catch a few people by surprise, I think, from a development side, because if you look at any new project, you see a lot of stone put down on those islands.
So I guess I've been thinking, and calling it myself, I've been thinking about this one a bit since the meeting, and I do have some concerns in the sense that, like, developers will see it and they'll say, well, we should just put in grass and we'll mow it. But that's not necessarily more environmentally friendly, because rocks are very, very minimal maintenance and they don't require a mower, which is adding, particulate pollution and, contributing to global warming. So I guess I have some hesitancy around that, in the sense that it might not actually make things better. But of course, other thoughts from the Plan Commission? Commissioner Tucker-Long and then Mr. Sayre?
Do we know if the goal is just to have more permeable surface? Because if so, we could just say permeable instead of living surface. would be an option, and then the rocks would still work.
Mr. Sayre?
Yeah, actually, that's I think that's kind of the intent. I'm not sure if we'd have to make sure on the rocks. I mean, and I had Carla leave the meeting because I thought she was done. I would ask her that question if she was still here. You could do that, or you could look at even changing this percentage as well. I mean, that was one of the ideas I was going to say. You could look at instead of 75%, you could say 25% or 50%. I don't know what the number is, but I think your option is a potential option as well too.
Other thoughts from the Plan Commission? I'll call myself and say I like the idea of saying pervious, because I think I think drainage will benefit us there, and as long as it's like, well, we will leave you the flexibility with how you get there, and leave it up to the property owner.
Okay, making that change.
Commissioner Tucker-Long, did you have your hand up, or? Okay.
I was just going to say that I don't like the idea of changing the percentage, because that still requires hauling a lawnmower out there. And I mean, the percentage that you're mowing is probably not as big of a change as whether or not you have to drive a mower out there, kind of a thing. So I'd rather just have, more rainwater focused as opposed to maintenance and upkeep. So either other, we could require like low maintenance, like non-mowing living things or something, but that's getting really picky. So.
Okay, we'll move on to the land use section, I believe. Ms. Holt.
So the task force recommended removing the red text for urban gardens, which are an accessory land use, and adding the yellow text, which you previously had recommended a couple months ago. And there was also discussion regarding item number 3 as to whether item number 1's percentage, that 20% of the lot's area, should be moved to item number 3 for the structures. But there was no consensus on that change. So this is what was the consensus at the task force meeting, the way it's written now.
Thoughts from the Plan Commission on how it is currently? Commissioner Tucker-Long.
I guess I'm in favor of getting rid of the percentage of the lots area. I guess I'm all for urban gardens, and I don't really want to get into measuring percentages of people's lots as far as how big their garden is. And I guess I'm not too fussy about number 3 either, with hoop houses and whatever, as long as like setbacks are allowed. I'm wondering though, with a setback of 3 feet from all property lines, if that still gives, we were talking about fire trucks getting through with setbacks and things like that, if that's enough of a setback. But I don't know.
Mr. Sayre?
I think that's 3 feet for a mower. The intent was to kind of get a mower in between there, and 3 feet seemed like maybe a pass and a half. So that was the thought process on that. So 36 inches, yeah, that should work for at least one pass down, one pass back.
Were there other hands, or Commissioner Powers?
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Tucker-Long. I think the getting rid of the 20% sounds good, and the 3 feet also sounds good to me.
All right. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Hingle.
Sorry, I'm looking at 2E and trying to figure what that means. Urban gardens located in front or corner yards shall be set back a minimum of 3 feet from all applicable property lines. I mean, I have garden that definitely crosses my property line. I don't understand. I mean, what are you supposed to have near your property line? Doesn't everyone have something near their property line?
Mr. Sayre, do you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I think the intent was having a separation between the neighbors. That was kind of the intent of it, so it doesn't go up right to the property line. That was the intent, to have some type of buffer. I know at my house, my gardens don't go up to my neighbor's property lines. But I think the intent was to have a slight separation off from the neighbors, so there was a mow strip kind of between there. That was the intent.
Commissioner Tucker Long, and then back to Commissioner Hengel.
Doesn't that just say in the front yard? Can we go back to the text? I thought it was only in the front yard, or corner lot. And I don't know if, urban gardens located in front or corner yards. So when we talk about a corner yard, is that just defined as the two sides of the lot that are on the street?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess I'm okay with needing 3 feet there, but I'm wondering if it should say 3 feet from property lines or easements, because I'm just thinking about plowing. And when the plow pushes stuff in your yard, it's way more than 3 feet into your yard. And I don't know if that's something we need to be concerned about, people getting their gardens destroyed by the snowplow or not, but for a lot line on the street, I don't know if that needs a different easement. Or a sidewalk. I mean, 3 feet, you'd be on the sidewalk,
Mr. Sayre?
Yeah, I wouldn't say easement, because I'll say just my lot is wrapped on 3, if not all 4 sides with easements. So the newer lots are typically wrapped around at least the 3, if not the 4 sides and easements on that. So I wouldn't say easement, because people don't realize it, but especially newer homes have a lot of easements on them compared to older homes. Now, I think with your case, Beth, I think you don't have a sidewalk, I don't think, in front of your house, correct? Yeah. So the question there might be...
No, but have you seen our snow pile?
Yeah, so the issue there might be, just your right-of-way, the actual right-of-way where your property line starts versus the curb. The right-of-way actually goes in probably maybe 6-7 feet off the actual curb itself. So technically that's within the right-of-way as it is, no different than the terrace trees between my house during the sidewalk. So I guess the question is, it says, front yard, so the setback of 3 feet from all applicable property lines in the front yard. So the front yard in that case would be in my case, be along the sidewalk. In your case, without the sidewalk, it'd be to that right-of-way line. And then the front yard would be the area in front of the house up to the kind of the face of the house going towards the street. And that's where you'd have to have that 3 feet. Beyond there, as you get towards the back and the sides of your house, then you could then technically take it right to the property lines.
So does that mean then you'd have to be 3 feet back from the sidewalk, or you're saying the sidewalk wouldn't count? I guess I wasn't clear which one you meant.
Go back to my house as the example. So the sidewalk, the property, my actual property line is typically, I believe, a foot beyond the sidewalk. So that would be approximately, say, 3 or 4 feet off the sidewalk, give or take. That's where it would kind of start from there. And then off the side of my house, where my neighbors is to the face of my house towards the street, that would still have that kind of 3 foot kind of green space.
Commissioner Hengel?
So you're saying that it would be like 1 foot on one side of the sidewalk, closer to the street, and then the 2 feet that would be actually on the sidewalk, and so the area next to the sidewalk near your house is okay to have a garden.
The sidewalk, so your property line actually is typically about a foot behind the sidewalk towards your house. That's typically where your property line actually starts.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, between that 1 foot and the curb is actually part of the city right-of-way.
Okay.
It's actually part of the street itself. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Other questions or comments on this one?
Can you put the wording back up for a second?
I will say you'll see this again. So we're not adopting it tonight. So I mean, you guys can you can think on this as well. If there's additional comments after the meeting, and I know we're 2.5 hours in the meeting, so we can all start getting a little loopy around this time. But if you come with comments or suggestions, you can always pass them to Catherine. But like I said, you'll see this again, obviously, and we can make more changes as well too. So you're not being held to whatever you decide tonight.
Commissioner Takalon.
Okay. Message Scott and Adam. I'm going to say one super quick thing just because I don't want to forget it. But in 2C, the not have any dead plant materials present, this is one thing I'm wondering about because I know there's been a big movement to leave your dead garden plants until spring, until after the bees and butterflies wake up, and which for us can be quite late, like pretty much June. And so a lot of gardeners are advocating for not clearing out your dead plant material until you plant your new materials. And so I just want to make sure this wouldn't get in the way of that.
Mr. Sayer.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that one. So we'll take a look at it and we can make some changes. I know what you're saying. It's regarding kind of seeds and everything else. So yeah, we can go back and we can tweak that slightly. But yeah, we can address that.
And just one quick follow-up that Commissioner Takalon reminded me of. This wouldn't apply to like prairie stuff because the essential part of a natural prairie is leaving the plants up over the winter because of the seeds and the insects and things like that.
That would fall under the natural lawn potential ordinance that we have that's separate in a different section.
Excellent. Okay. Unless there's any further comments, we'll move on to the next part.
Okay, so in the packet, I have matched the proposed zoning map colors on this map to the comparison tables that were created for the projects that were either built, approved, or almost completed in the development review process. Those included Classic, Old National Property, Costco, Sugar River Pizza, Market 5, Dingbat, Engineering Industries, Campus 5 of Epic, RIT Nutrition, Kettle Creek North, and a bunch of others. So the goal is to find projects in different zones to determine if what is proposed in the draft ordinance is still valid for those zones. Typically, most cities don't ever have time to do this when they have a proposed ordinance, to have the downtime to do this comparison, and then you end up doing a lot of changes after it's adopted. So I know this seems like a kind of a crazy process to discuss, but one of the things that staff found by doing this comparison table was that the restaurants and fitness facilities that were that we place in certain zones were going to be prohibited in the proposed ordinance. So that was a quick catch right there that we've already fixed. So now we will allow RIT Nutrition to stay in its zone. But it also changed a couple other things too by doing this, which we found was that, for example, RIT Nutrition would be permitted by right in this zone instead of having a conditional use permit be required. So going back to the previous question Hingle asked was overall, several of the development proposals would change from a plan unit development review to a site plan review if exemptions were not requested. So out of the 11 to 12 items that are in the packet, 3 of those projects would remain as a PUD due to the front yard setbacks that were needed for their project, and one happens to be the Lincoln Street Apartments. The front yard setback was reduced, and that would still have to go through the PUD process. 8 other projects would become site plan reviews, which would just go straight to the Plan Commission for their final approval. It would not go to the Common Council. And 2 of those projects would still need a conditional use permit, which some of that was being tweaked too. I think that still goes to the Common Council for their final approval. Originally, out of all of those projects, 5 of them initially needed a conditional use permit. Epic always has to come for a conditional use permit because it's a group development, and as part of the new ordinance, we got rid of group development, so that would shorten their process. They could come in for a site plan review unless, as Beth pointed out earlier, they would need parking exemptions, then that would have to come through the PUD process. Going back to the Costco idea, even though it was proposed and approved tonight, we do have a comparison table in the staff packet. So the current ordinance has a minimum of 529 parking stalls. The proposed ordinance has a range of the parking requirements. So when you calculate it out, the range comes from about 535 parking spaces to 1,070 parking spaces, which would be the maximum parking number. Costco proposed 773, which is about the middle of that range. I know in the past we've had other conversations at the Plan Commission about parking, and it seemed kind of high for certain developments, and others seemed reasonable or on the lower end of the scale. So in the packet there are, the parking tables, and that is purely because we just did it as a minimum, so it was pretty much the minimum, and then we doubled that to get the maximum loosely. And if that seemed too high, then we do need to adjust those to make it like the maximum lower, if that's what we want. And we can do that for certain ones or not certain ones. And again, this doesn't have to be finalized tonight. I mean, the ultimate goal for all of these discussions is that the consultant would give us back a draft plan, hopefully by the end of this week. And then depending on what we see as staff, we may have the public hearing depending on timing at the next Plan Commission meeting in April. And then we could potentially adopt it either at that meeting, or we could wait till May so that we make all of the changes and have a clean copy with all the comments embedded into that final document for approval. So that's where things stand now. I mean, I'm open to any questions or comments you guys do have on any of these topics.
Thank you for that explanation. Questions or comments on this item? I just have one quick comment. Over 1,000 parking stalls seems like an absolute lot. And I mean, Epic accepted, but for most developments, that's going to be a lot. On the other hand, parking costs money too, so it's entirely possible that the developers aren't going to want to build it anyway just because it'll be expensive. That's my thought. Other feedback on this topic? Seeing no hands. Anything further on this one, Ms. Holt? All right. And with that, we will move on to item 13, I believe. Reports and comments from the planning department.
Not too much. We have our development projects on the website. The next Planning Commission meeting in April will be April 7th. Is that right, Catherine? Okay, April 7th. So Wednesday, and we typically do that because of the election. So, and obviously this is going to probably be virtual, but just out of habit, we're going to stick with what we've done in years past. So just please mark your calendars that April 7th will be the Plan Commission meeting. And then finally, we had a joint city town planning committee meeting last week that Catherine attended. There's, I think, 4 CSMs on there that occurred in the town on just some minor land divisions that will be going to the council actually on Monday. So we're happy to answer any questions from the Plan Commission.
Any questions for Mr. Sayer and Ms. Holt? Seeing no hands, we'll move on to item 14, which is adjournment. A motion to adjourn would be in order. Commissioner Powers?
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Seconded by Commissioner Tucker-Long. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
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 Opposed, no. And we are adjourned at 9:08 p.m. Thank you all.
Here's everybody. Good night.
Have a good night, everyone.